Somewhere in a village called Roseville, Ohio, on Tuesday morning, a person had a medical emergency and someone called for help. Help did not arrive in time, not because nobody came, because there was no longer a road to come on. Every route into that village was underwater, and by the time crews could reach the address, it was over. That person is one of the confirmed deaths from this week's storms in the American Midwest. They were not struck by wind. They were not swept away by a river. They died because of the distance between them and the people trying to reach them, and that distance was made out of water. I keep coming back to that because the storm that created that distance had already left. By the time the floodwater closed Roseville off from the rest of Ohio, the windstorm that started this entire chain was hundreds of miles away and falling apart. What hit the middle of the United States on August 11th, 2026, was not one disaster. It was two disasters, handed from one to the other like a relay, and the second one is still running right now, as I record this. Over the next 20 minutes, I am going to rebuild that day for you, hour by hour, from the field in eastern Iowa where it was born at 7 in the morning, through Chicago, through the single measurement in Gary, Indiana, that told meteorologists exactly what they were dealing with, and into the Ohio hills where the wind quit and the water took over. I will show you the number that made the National Weather Service reach for a word they use only a few times a year. And I will tell you plainly which parts of this were extraordinary and which parts were not, because there is a version of this story circulating online right now that is louder than the truth and, strangely, less frightening than it. If you want the honest version of events like this one, told fast and without the nonsense, subscribing takes 1 second and puts the next one in front of you. Let's start in the dark, before anyone knew what was coming. Early Tuesday morning, eastern Iowa is farmland and quiet roads and towns most Americans have never heard of. Delaware County sits up in the northeast corner of the state, near a place called Greeley. Just after 7:30 in the morning, local time, the sky there did something that residents recognized immediately and hated. The National Weather Service office in Davenport would later confirm 3 separate tornadoes on the ground in Delaware County in a window of about 20 minutes between roughly 7:30 and 7:50 in the morning. All of them were rated EF1, which is the lower end of the damage scale, the kind that strips roofs and snaps trees rather than erasing structures. Those tornadoes are not the story. They are the opening credits. What the radar was really showing that morning was a cluster of thunderstorms merging into a single organized line. Forecasters call this a mesoscale convective system, and most mornings a system like that would fizzle by mid-morning as it eats through the unstable air feeding it. This one did the opposite. It got faster. It got wider. And the leading edge of it started to bend forward into a shape meteorologists watch for the way a doctor watches for an irregular heartbeat. By around 1200 hours Coordinated Universal Time, which is 7 in the morning Central Time, the Storm Prediction Center's clock on this event officially starts. From that moment, the line began marching east at a speed that is difficult to appreciate until you convert it. The confirmed portion of its track ran 331 miles from eastern Iowa across northern Illinois into northwest Indiana. It covered that ground in roughly 5.5 hours. Do the division and you get something close to 60 miles an hour. If you had gotten in your car in Greeley, Iowa at the same moment that line got organized, driven the interstate east at the speed limit, never stopped for fuel, never stopped for coffee, never stopped at all, you would have arrived in northern Indiana at roughly the same time as the storm. It moved at highway speed, and it was 70 miles wide. That is the part that separates this kind of event from a normal severe weather day. A thunderstorm passes over your house in 15 minutes, and then it is somebody else's problem. This thing did not pass over a town. It passed over a region, and it kept its strength the entire way, which brings us to the mechanism, because how it did that is the whole reason it earned its name. By mid-morning, the line was closing on Chicago, and just before 11 o'clock Central Time, the tornado sirens went off across the city, not in a suburb. Across the city, Photographs from that morning show the leading edge rolling into the Austin neighborhood along West Madison Street as a solid gray wall with no visible top, the kind of sky that makes people stop on the sidewalk and take a video they later regret taking. Tornado warnings were issued for Aurora, Joliet, Naperville, and downtown Chicago itself. Every flight at both of Chicago's major airports was temporarily halted, and once you stop departures at O'Hare and Midway simultaneously, you have created a scheduling failure that ripples through the entire national air system for the rest of the day. Wind gusts in parts of Chicago were clocked above 90 miles an hour. In Sugar Grove, Illinois, an instrument recorded 97. In Shorewood, 96. And for context on what those numbers do, wind does not hurt you in proportion to its speed. The force it exerts rises with the square of the speed. A 96-mile-per-hour gust does not hit your roof twice as hard as a 48-mile-per-hour gust. It hits roughly 4 times as hard. That is why a storm that produces winds in the 90s does not just take shingles. It takes the tree, the pole, the wire, and the transformer, in that order, in the space of about 90 seconds. Then the line crossed the state border into Indiana. And at Gary, an instrument recorded the number that settled the argument. 86 knots. 99 miles per hour. That is the maximum measured gust of the entire event, and it was recorded not on a coastline, not in a hurricane, but roughly 700 miles from the nearest ocean, in an industrial city on the southern shore of Lake Michigan. 99 miles per hour is Category 2 hurricane wind. It arrived in northwest Indiana with no evacuation notice, no cone of uncertainty tracked for 5 days, no name. It arrived about 3 hours after it was born. So how does a line of thunderstorms hold hurricane force across 4 states without weakening? Here is what is happening inside it, and I want you to picture it as a machine that lays down its own track and then rides it. Rain falling out of a thunderstorm cools the air around it as it evaporates. Cold air is heavy, so it sinks and hits the ground and spreads outward in every direction, like water poured onto a flat table. Meteorologists call that spreading mass of chilled air the cold pool. In an ordinary storm, that cold pool is the beginning of the end. It cuts the storm off from the warm, humid air it was feeding on, and the storm suffocates itself. But if the atmosphere ahead of the line is warm enough and moist enough, something else happens. The leading edge of that spreading cold air acts like a plow. It shovels the warm air in front of it upward. Warm air forced upward becomes a new thunderstorm. That new thunderstorm rains, cools more air, and adds its own cold air to the pool behind it. The pool grows and elongates and pushes forward faster. Old cells die at the back. New cells are born at the front. The system is not one storm traveling. It is a continuous chain of storms igniting each other in sequence, and the cold pool is the track it lays in front of itself. And then the second stage kicks in. As that cold air mass builds, it creates a pressure difference between the front of the system and the region behind it, and air begins rushing in from the rear at high speed, several thousand feet up. Forecasters call this the rear inflow jet. When that jet descends and touches the ground, it delivers the momentum of upper-level winds directly to street level, and the leading edge of the line bulges forward on radar into a shape that looks exactly like an archer's bow. That signature is called a bow echo, and it is what the Storm Prediction Center was staring at all Tuesday morning. String enough of that together across enough distance, and you have earned the word derecho. It comes from Spanish, and it means straight ahead, which is precisely the point. This wind does not spin. It shoves. Everything it knocks down points the same direction, and that is how survey teams tell the difference on the ground. By definition, the Storm Prediction Center requires a swath of damaging wind at least 250 miles long, gusts of at least 58 miles per hour along that length. Several well-separated gusts of 75 miles per hour or higher, and radar evidence of exactly the structures I just described. Tuesday's system had all of it. Winds above 75 miles per hour were recorded along a 300-mile stretch from northeast Iowa to northern Indiana. At 5:07 in the afternoon Eastern Time on Tuesday, the Storm Prediction Center posted the preliminary confirmation. And then on Wednesday morning, at 11:37 Eastern, they extended the path even further into central Indiana, southeastern Ohio, and eastern Kentucky. Quick question for you. While the wind is still blowing in this story, and I mean it, because the comments on these videos have taught me more about how these storms behave on the ground than any dataset does. If your lights went out on Tuesday, drop the name of your town and how long you sat in the dark. I read them. Now, before we follow the water, we need to do the honest part, because there are two claims flying around about this event that are wrong, and one of them is the reason people misjudge these storms every single time. The first, this was not a tornado outbreak. 6 tornadoes have been confirmed or preliminarily identified across the whole event, 3 in Delaware County, Iowa, and 3 around the Chicago area with damage consistent with EF1 intensity, 2 of which continued into Lake County, Indiana. 6 weak tornadoes is a bad afternoon, not a historic outbreak. Nearly all of the destruction on Tuesday, the flattened trees, the snapped poles, the flipped vehicle caught on an Ohio Department of Transportation camera along Interstate 71 in Columbus, came from straight-line wind. And here is why that distinction matters more than it sounds. A tornado is narrow. You can be 400 yards from an EF1 tornado and never know it happened. A derecho does not miss you. It is 70 miles wide and it takes everything in a line, and people who have spent their lives being told to fear the funnel do not take the straight wind seriously enough. On Tuesday, the straight wind is what did nearly all of it. The second correction, the derecho classification is preliminary. The Storm Prediction Center said so themselves in writing. Official derecho designations for 2026 will not be finalized until 2027 once the year's storm data is complete and reviewed. They also said they are confident this one will hold up. Both things are true at once, and you will see channels this week telling you it is confirmed with no qualifier at all. It is preliminary, it is very likely to stand, and the honest sentence includes both halves. And one more piece of scale, because comparison is where hype usually dies. In August of 2020, a derecho crossed this same part of the country with a track of 770 miles and a measured gust of 126 miles per hour at Atkins, Iowa. It caused $11.2 billion in damage and remains the costliest thunderstorm event ever recorded in the United States. Tuesday's storm was shorter, slower, and weaker at its peak. It was not the worst derecho in modern American history. It was still enough to take the power out for more than 1 million homes and businesses. Which brings us to the second disaster, and to why this event is going to be remembered for water instead of wind. While that line of storms was crossing Illinois and Indiana on Tuesday morning, a completely different problem was already unfolding 2 states east. Southeastern Ohio had been sitting under repeated rounds of heavy rain, and in the Crooksville and Roseville area, about 5 inches of rain fell overnight and into the late morning. Moxahala Creek came up. In Perry County, the water rose 6 to 10 feet in low-lying areas. 10 feet is the height of the rim on a basketball court. That is the water level, not in a river channel, but in neighborhoods. Ohio's Emergency Management Agency director reported that by Tuesday morning, around 200 people had either evacuated or could no longer reach their own homes. 2 bridges were overtopped. Swift water rescue teams from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources were deployed alongside local crews, and firefighters began going door to door in Perry County. In Crooksville, water at one gas station rose halfway up the pumps. Roseville, a village of roughly 1,500 people straddling Perry and Muskingum counties, was surrounded. By Tuesday afternoon, only a single road out remained passable. Governor Mike DeWine declared a state of emergency for both counties, activated the Ohio National Guard's High Water Rescue Unit, and told anyone still inside Roseville to leave while leaving was still possible. 40 Ohio Army National Guard members from transportation companies in North Canton and Coshocton were dispatched with 20 tactical vehicles. And it was in that village, cut off, that the person I opened this video with died during a medical emergency because the roads were gone. The rainfall totals behind this are the part that stops you. Residents of Roseville were urged to evacuate after roughly 2 months' worth of rain fell in 2 days. Not 2 months of rain in a wet season. 2 months in 48 hours. Down in Dayton, the daily rainfall record fell 2.07 inches, breaking a mark that had stood since 1915. That old record was set when Woodrow Wilson was in the White House and the United States had not yet entered the First World War. It stood for 111 years and it went down on a Tuesday. Meanwhile, the wind was still collecting its own bill. In Lorain County, southwest of Cleveland, lightning struck the grounds of the Grafton Correctional Institution on Tuesday evening as incarcerated men were returning from dinner. 16 people were hospitalized, one of them transported by helicopter. 7 remained hospitalized the following day, including one in serious condition. No deaths were reported. I have covered a lot of lightning incidents on this channel, and I have never covered one with 16 casualties from a single strike in a place where nobody had the option of choosing when to walk outside. In Portage, Indiana, about 30 miles southeast of Chicago, a house exploded shortly after the storms passed and 1 person was killed. Investigators are still working, but police said preliminarily that trees knocked down by the wind may have damaged natural gas lines and that fallen trees across the roads delayed firefighters getting there. A police captain who had lived in Portage for 50 years told reporters it was the most severe weather event anyone there could remember. And in Geneva Township, Indiana, a tree came down onto a home during Tuesday's storms and a 4-year-old boy was killed. That, according to the sheriff's office, is the 3rd confirmed death. Then came Wednesday, and Wednesday is when the story stopped being about a windstorm at all. The ground across eastern Indiana and Ohio was already saturated. It had no capacity left, and the atmosphere sent another round of rain into exactly the same footprint. In east central Indiana, the National Weather Service issued multiple flash flood emergencies, which is the highest alert level that exists for flooding and is reserved for situations already threatening lives. Parts of 7 Indiana counties were under it. In Wayne County, up to 10 inches of rain fell in under 24 hours. Here is what 10 inches of rain means on the ground. On a single acre, 1 inch of rain is about 27,000 gallons of water. 10 inches is roughly 270,000 gallons. An average backyard swimming pool holds somewhere around 20,000. So on every acre of Wayne County, the sky delivered something on the order of 13 or 14 swimming pools. Now multiply that by every acre in the county, and then remember that all of it has to go somewhere, and the only somewhere available is downhill into creeks that were already full. Cambridge City's Main Street went under several feet of water, and police posted video of rescue crews working in it. Officials imposed a level 3 travel warning prohibiting all non-emergency travel and issued boil advisories. In Muncie, the fire department went door to door pulling people out of homes. Radar estimates suggested that the corridor from Newcastle down toward Connorsville had taken up to 10 inches of rain since early Tuesday morning. At the peak of Wednesday, flash flood warnings were in effect for about 16 million people. That is more people than live in the entire state of Ohio, under an active flood warning at the same moment. The power grid, meanwhile, was having the worst week it had experienced in some places in its entire recorded history. More than 800,000 customers were without electricity across Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky at midnight going into Wednesday. That number had been above 1 million at the peak. By Wednesday morning, it was still above 700,000 across 6 states, and by Wednesday afternoon, still above 650,000. One utility serving northern Indiana said publicly that this was the single largest outage event in the company's history. And I want to translate the word customer because it hides the scale. A customer is a meter, not a person. 1 meter can be a family of 5, or an apartment building, or a nursing home, or a dialysis clinic. When you hear 800,000 customers, the number of actual human beings sitting in the dark in August humidity with refrigerators warming up and medical equipment on battery is comfortably over 2 million. American Electric Power, working out of Columbus, reported more than 100 broken poles, around 650 down spans of wire, and another 85 spans tangled in trees. A span is the stretch of cable between two poles. They had restored 135,000 customers and still had 76,000 out. In Columbus itself, the mayor declared a city emergency on Wednesday to give crews room to work. So why did this happen here? And why did it refuse to stop? Look at the larger map, and the answer is a shape. A very large dome of high pressure had built in over the southern United States, the kind of heat ridge that pushes forecast highs into the upper 90s and low 100s and drives heat index values into the range of 105 to 115 degrees. Air sinks inside a ridge like that, which suppresses storms directly underneath it. But storms have to go somewhere, and they get shunted around the northern rim of the dome, riding the jet stream over the top of it like traffic funneled onto a single ring road. Forecasters have a nickname for that northern rim. They call it the Ring of Fire. The Midwest and the Ohio Valley were sitting exactly on that rim this week. And when a slow-moving front stalls in that corridor, with tropical-grade moisture streaming north into it, you get storms that form in the same place, follow the same path, and pass over the same towns one after another after another. Meteorologists call that training, like rail cars on a track, and it is the single most reliable way to produce a flash flood emergency in the United States. Tuesday's derecho was the Ring of Fire delivering wind. Wednesday's flooding was the Ring of Fire delivering rain into ground that could not accept another drop, which raises the question everyone asks, so let me answer it carefully rather than loudly. Is this climate change? The honest answer is that nobody can attribute a single storm to it without a formal attribution study, and none exists for this event yet. What the physics does say, and this is not controversial, is that warmer air holds more water vapor, on the order of about 7% more for every degree Celsius of warming, and that heavy rainfall events across the eastern United States have been getting more intense as a result. So the rainfall side of this week has a well-supported general context. The wind side does not. Derecho trends are genuinely uncertain. These events are relatively rare. The historical record is inconsistent, and the definition itself was revised as recently as 2016 and again in 2025, which makes long-term comparison difficult. Anyone telling you derechos are clearly becoming more frequent is going beyond what the data currently supports. The rain we can talk about with confidence. The wind we cannot. That is the real state of the science, and it is less satisfying than either extreme you will hear this week. One more piece of honesty, and it might be the most important thing in this entire video. The warning system worked. Tornado warnings were issued for Chicago before the line arrived. The derecho was flagged while it was still crossing Illinois. Flash flood emergencies were issued in Indiana before the worst of Wednesday's water. The governor of Ohio stood at a podium Tuesday afternoon and told people the danger would not end that night. And he was right. And 3 people still died. Look at how. A tree onto a house, a gas line possibly severed by a fallen tree, and roads blocked so firefighters could not get through. A flooded road between a person having a medical emergency and an ambulance. None of those deaths are the kind a better forecast prevents. They are the kind that infrastructure, tree maintenance, and road access prevent. The forecast told everyone what was coming. What killed people was what the storm did to the connections between them and help. That is the lesson I would take out of this week if I lived anywhere in the corridor from Iowa to West Virginia. Not that the sirens failed. They did not. But that a modern town is only as safe as its ability to be reached, and a wind that takes down 10,000 trees, and a rain that closes every road can strip that ability away in a single morning. And this is not over. As of the end of Wednesday, roughly 300,000 customers in Indiana alone were still without power. The National Guard was still working in Ohio, and river gauges across the Ohio Valley were still rising in places where the runoff has not yet reached the larger channels. That is the cruel part of flooding after a rain event ends. The creeks respond in hours. The rivers respond over days. The Weather Prediction Center had a moderate risk of excessive rainfall posted over portions of the Ohio Valley, and forecasters were pointing to continued heavy rain threats through the end of the week across the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic, with that same enormous heat dome holding its position over the south and steering everything around its northern edge. So here is exactly what to watch over the next several days. Watch the river crest forecasts rather than the rainfall maps, because the rain is only the input and the crest is the outcome. And the towns downstream from this week's worst totals in eastern Indiana and southeastern Ohio have not seen their peak yet. Watch whether the Storm Prediction Center extends the Derecho's official track any further east than eastern Kentucky, because if it does, the final measured length of this thing grows well beyond 331 miles, and watch the ridge. As long as that dome of heat sits where it is, the storm track stays parked on top of the same exhausted, saturated ground, and every new round lands on soil that has nothing left to absorb it. The final ruling on whether this officially enters the record as a 2026 derecho will not come until next year when the storm data is closed out. But the people in Roseville and Crooksville and Cambridge City and Muncie and Gary do not need a classification to tell them what crossed over their houses this week. I am tracking the crests and the outage numbers daily, and the next update on this system goes up as soon as the rivers tell us something new. Subscribe and turn the bell on if you want that the moment it lands, because the wind part of this story is finished and the water part is not.